Hello, come in, welcome. Hi, nice to see you. Come and have a seat. Oh, we soldier on, eh? Sometimes I really think it's only the combination of the Peterson pipes and the poetry that keeps me going, really. Anyway, I thought it might be nice. Obviously, a while back I was reflecting on Keats, but another of the poets I've been turning to again and again is good old Yeats. And I think I read you, when you visited quite a while back, the first lockdown, I read you that lovely early Yeats poem, The Song of the Wandering Angus, from The Wind Among the Reeds, the poetry of Yeats's youth. Though, of course, that finishes by saying, when I am old with though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk along long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. It was a poem of his youth, anticipating his age. But I suppose maybe just because the years are upon me, and I've almost become, he talks in one of his poems about being a 60-year-old smiling public man. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just a bit over 60 now. So I love the poems of his age as well as the poems of his youth, and I thought it might be good to get some. I'm going to wander over here. I've got Yeats over here, nice and close to his great compatriot and successor, Seamus Heaney. We'll go back to Heaney again sometime, but let's get this nice collected Yeats out. Or as you probably know, Yeats, Yeats made this dramatic change, really, from being the most brilliant of the late Romantic poets in the end of the 19th century. He kind of remade himself, really transformed himself. Extraordinarily bold and powerful thing to do, as he saw, the changes and both the devastations but also the new perspectives of the modern world, and became really part of the high modernist movement, of which the other great figures, I suppose, were Eliot and Joyce, of course, and later Beckett. And his brilliance in doing that is amazing. The poem where he makes the change is from Responsibilities. It's a little poem, a very famous little poem. That book was published in 1914. You remember the poem about the coat, which both looks back to his old poetry and forward to his new poetry. I made my song a coat covered with embroideries out of old mythologies from heel to throat. Well, of course, the Song of the Wandering Angus that we read before was one of the embroideries out of old mythologies. I made my song a coat covered with embroideries out of old mythologies from heel to throat, but the fools caught it, wore it in the world's eyes as though they'd wrought it. Song, let them take it, for there's more enterprise in walking naked. And he had the power and the ability to do just that, change his style. But he continued, of course, always as a poet to be formed by the great ages of the past. And one of the most powerful things Yeats does is to bring the insights, the art, the ideas, the very form and skill and craftsmanship of earlier ages to bear on our own and to give us these shifting perspectives. Anyway, for whatever reason, I've been reading the two volumes, in some ways companion volumes, The Tower on the one hand and The Winding Stair. The Tower was 1928, The Winding Stair was somewhere in the 30s, towards the very end of Yeats's life. I just thought I'd read to you perhaps one of Yeats's, again, one of his most famous poems. There's so many of his poems are famous. Sailing to Byzantium. And it's a poem, in a sense, almost about self-chosen exile. He'd become quite a public figure by then, and he was a senator and all this. And he'd won the Nobel Prize and yet he felt in his old age that he needed to rekindle the flame in some powerful way, and that he couldn't do it, in a sense, in his own country. That is no country for old men, is the famous opening line of the poem. There's so much happening in it, in the image of the birds and the way it moves through the four elements. But rather than thinking about picking it over entirely with the scholars, let's just hear it. It's just an astonishing poem. It's the opening poem of the collection, The Tower, and in a sense the rest of the collection unfolds its themes in different ways. The Tower, sailing to Byzantium. That is no country for old men. The young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song, the salmon-falls, the mackerel-crowded seas, fish, flesh or fowl, commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born and dies. Caught in that sensual mad music, all neglect monuments of unageing intellect. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence, and therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. O sages, standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, burn in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fastened to a dying animal. It knows not what it is. And gather me into the artifice of eternity. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enamelling to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past, or passing, or to come. Oh, goodness me. It's just an astonishing poem. Particularly the end, the conspectus of time, what is past or passing or to come. But all of that given a new perspective inside the artifices of eternity. It's just extraordinary. It starts with this sense of, that we all get as we get older, of being somehow slightly on the side of everything, you know. All the action is with the young, you know, the young in one another's arms. And the opening verse is all about, it's about life and fecundity and you know, it's the, and yet it strikes the music of the poem, because the word song, singing school is all the way through. Yeats, for all his being, as he calls himself, you know, a tattered coat on a stick, is still singing, my goodness. So it starts with all that fecundity, the salmon-falls, the mackerel-crowded seas, and all summer long people are thinking about what is begotten, born, and of course dies. That the point about the freshness of youth is that it's on its way to death. The point about, you know, begetting is that it's also dying, you know, as Beckett would say later. You know, they give birth astride the grave, the light gleams for an instant, then all is darkness. And that all has its place, but there is more. There's something eternal in us. And Yeats seemed to feel that the pattern of great art in the past, and for him, of course, particularly the pattern of poetry, though I think he's also in this poem definitely thinking of these beautiful Byzantine mosaics, you know, all put together out of little pieces by living people, but the stones themselves are eternal and they make a pattern that radiates and shines. So he contrasts at the very end of this first verse, look at this, all these things, whatever is begotten, born and dies, caught, and what is it, the thing, this is all great, but what this does is it makes you, here's the key word, neglect monuments of unageing intellect. And it's the monuments of unageing intellect that the rest of the poem is about. So in the next verse, he says, I could just be an aged man, a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. And again, it's words, unless, and this is a great idea, that somehow in amongst one's kind of tattered and bedraggled age, the soul in here is just as bright, just as shining, just as vigorous, just as full of the potential of song and art as ever it was when one was a careless young man. And what the soul has to do is clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. I've been reading that and reading that again. I'm feeling the tatters, to be honest, in my mortal dress. And I feel Yeats coming to me and saying, sing, Malcolm, sing louder. Clap your hands and sing for every tatter in your mortal dress. And then he goes on to tell you how to make yourself into the kind of person who can do that, how to study, how to learn from the past, how to look at the art. So he says, nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence, that monuments word that had come there. And then he has this idea, he takes you on a kind of through the poetry on a magical voyage, not just across the seas to Byzantium, but into the past, into this place where, for a while, there was a perfect meeting between art, theology and philosophy, and a series of extraordinary and beautiful monuments. He's thinking of the Hagia Sophia, but he's probably also thinking of the great mosaics at Ravenna that were done by that school and at the time that have survived better than the ones in Byzantium as it was, Constantinople as it. And then he has this image of the singing school, the great masters, the sages, and he sees them as standing in a holy fire. And this is a fire, this is like the fire, our God is a living fire. This is the fire that, on the one hand, burns and consumes away everything that's merely passing, whatever is dross, but illuminates and gives splendour to whatever is permanent. O sages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, burn in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. And then Yeats confesses all the difficulties. And I mean, he said in his poem The Spur, you think it horrible that lust and rage should dance attendance on old age, but then he says, what else do I have to spur me into song? And he says, look, my heart is sick with desire and it's fastened to a dying animal and it doesn't even know what it is. I need to find out what it is, and I need the great masters of the old singing schools to tell me. It knows not what it is, but gather me into the artifice of eternity. And then he finishes with this amazing image of this beautiful bird on the golden bough, singing to the emperor of what is past and passing is to come. Well, of course, Yeats was thinking of other poets when he wrote about their becoming his masters in the singing school. But for me, now in my 60s, Yeats in his 60s is one of those singing masters. And I was reading this. I recently had to give a lecture just the other night. I gave an online lecture about Dante. Of course, it's incredibly important to Yeats. I mean, Yeats refers to Dante as the chief imagination of Christendom in his poem Ego Dominus Tuus. And Eliot probably had both Yeats and Dante in mind when, in Little Gidding, he meets this compound ghost who's both Yeats and Dante and possibly Blake, who says to him, you too need to be purged in the fire and clarified. From wrong to wrong, the exasperated spirit proceeds unless restored by that refining fire where you must move in measure like a dancer. And Eliot at that point is thinking of the great moment when all the poets gather together, Virgil and Dante and Alma and Statius, to go through the fire in order to get back to the garden at the end of the Purgatorio. Anyway, I was giving this lecture on Dante and I was illustrating it with some poems I'd written myself about the experience of reading Dante. It's sort of personal poems about the experience of reading the Commedia. And in the course of it, I read one called Dancing Through the Fire, which I suddenly realised I knew it owed a lot to Dante, to that moment in Dante, and I knew it owed a lot to Eliot. But it was only as I began to read Yeats again that I realised how much it owed to this poem at the opening of the Tower Sailing to Byzantium. So maybe if you just got a minute, we can finish. I'll read you that poem of my own. I told you the other day about how I thought Keats's sonnet, When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, learnt, if you like, in the singing school from Shakespeare. So here, in my own poem, I've learnt, as it were, in the singing school from Yeats and Eliot, and before them and shining through them from Dante. And this is my own account, not only of the desires and lusts that need, and all of that which need to be dealt with in any person and brought to the holy fire, but also my debt to the great masters of the singing school and my own vocation as a poet. So it's just called Dancing Through the Fire. Then stir my love in idleness to flame, to find at last the free refining fire that guards the hidden garden whence I came. Oh, do not kill, but quicken my desire. Better to spur me on than leave me cold. Not maimed I come to you. I come entire, lit by the loves that warm, the lusts that scold, that you may prove the one, reprove the other, though both have been the strength by which I scaled the steps so far, to come where poets gather and sing such songs as love gives them to sing. I thank God for the ones who brought me hither and taught me, by example, how to bring the slow growth of a poem to fruition and let it be itself a living thing, taught me to trust the gifts of intuition and still to try the tautness of each line, taught me to taste the grace of transformation and trace in dust the face of the divine, taught me the truth, as poet and as Christian, that drawing water turns it into wine. Now I am drawn, through their imagination, to dare to dance with them into the fire, harder than any grand renunciation, to bring to Christ the heart of my desire, just as it is, in every imperfection, surrendered to his bright refiner's fire, that love might have its death and resurrection. So I realise now that that line, I thank God for the ones who brought me hither and taught me by example how to bring the slow growth of a poem to fruition and let it be itself a living thing, those lines are really a thanksgiving to God for, among other people, the great William Butler Yeats. Thanks for dropping by.